Hi guys, I'm back, and with more modern science fiction book recommendations. And I have got some really good ones for you. So a couple of quick housekeeping pieces. Modern science fiction, at least according to my channel's definition, is gonna be from the 1990s and on. And this is arbitrary, but it's one I'm sticking to. If you haven't already checked out my initial modern science fiction book recommendations, you should definitely do so because there is not any crossover between these two videos. All right, you guys, let's start with these 10 book recommendations. The first one on this list is by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and that is The Cage of Souls. Not only is this cover gorgeous and one of the most beautiful covers of the books that I have read this year, but this book is one of those books that I'm not quite sure how to classify. Our main character's name is Stefan, and he has been condemned to a prison island on a dying planet. And this planet has flora and fauna that are not very friendly to humans, and the atmosphere and the environment in and of itself is very dark and very ominous. On top of trying to survive the island itself, he also has to survive the other inmates as well as the prison guards. While Stefan gets going with his surviving program, we also get flashback chapters where we get to see how Stefan got condemned. He also discovers a plot amongst the inmates and some of the guards that they're going to throw a coup and come off the island and invade the last human city on the planet. This definitely throws Stefan's survival trope into a loop because we see that he not only has to survive their plans, but he also has to survive trying to escape the island and not being blamed for what happened. We also start to see what happened to humanity on this planet. There's a lot to unpack in this book, and it really had a lot more deeper themes than I expected from the initial premise on the back of the book. But this one is definitely one that I can highly recommend. It is a standalone, and it is one that I'm not going to be 100% sure how I feel about it at the very, very end until a couple of days afterward. The next book on this list is one that is very controversial, but you might know, and that is Neal Stephenson's Seveneves. Now this book is divided into 3 parts, and it is part 3 that is so controversial. In parts 1 and 2, we have humanity, which has been faced with one of the best opening lines of all times. The moon blew up without warning and for no apparent reason. There you go. Humanity has to survive the moon blowing up, and we have approximately 2 years before the pieces of the moon are going to fall into the planet and cause Earth to be unlivable, which means we only have 2 years and the structures that we already have in place to try for species survival, which means that 98% of the planet is definitely going to die. And boy, do all of these countries and resources throw everything they have at trying to hope that they can make it in space while the Earth settles in its apocalypse. These first 2 parts get really heavy into those nitty-gritty details of physics and mathematics and economics of how to get humanity to survive. Now, normally I would find those kinds of exposés a little bit boring, but in this particular book, some reason I was really interested. I think it's because Neal Stephenson presented it almost like an unwritten way that the humans that were left used it as a coping mechanism to get lost in all the details, and that's kind of how they allow the reader and the characters to process that they're not going to be the ones to survive. Now really where we get to all of those controversies is part 3. Part 3 is where we learn the meaning of the title of this book, and we get into the speculation that Neal Stephenson presents with us on the future of humanity. A lot of people really didn't like part 3, although there are tons of people out there who not only liked it, but wanted more. And I find myself in that last category. I found that what Neal Stephenson says about humanity and our survival for the future is really an interesting prospect. I wish he had spent more time explaining all of the things that he was trying to say in part 3. I do recommend that you actually physically read this book because there are lots of different maps and recommendations by the author to explain what he is trying to explain. So something that you should definitely check out or download on an ebook or something like that. I did find Neal Stephenson's ending to be a little bit less than satisfactory, and I wish this book wasn't a standalone. That said, I really thought it had so much to say about humanity, and it provides so much speculation that I think this book would be a heck of a good conversation piece. Next book on our list is one I haven't heard a lot of people talking about, and that is Infomocracy by Malka Older. I might be saying that wrong. Malka Older. This book is a book that's heavy into politics in a way that was almost intimidating for me. This author really seems to understand politics and the inner workings of government on both a micro and macro scale in a way that I'm really jealous of. This book follows two main characters. The first is Ken, who is campaigning for his particular political party to the globe. In this world, there are no countries, there are no cities or sections. We only have the population divided by 100,000 units. And each little unit gets to vote on whatever political party they want to win. The political party that has a majority is called the supermajority, and they're the ones who rule the majority of the earth or the citizens of the world for about 10 years until there's another election. This way of ruling, this political system, is called microdemocracy. And it really points out some of the flaws in our system in very cute and clever ways. This book was also full of a lot of little nuances, a lot of little hidden speculations that I was not privy to and had to stop and look up. But when I finally gave up looking up all of the little aspects of the political pieces that she included in this book, I found this story to be rather enjoyable. Ken's campaigning is both frustrating and informative, and the second character in this book, Mishima, who works for a Information, which is an entire political party that doesn't want to win. It's just dedicated to providing complete and accurate information to all citizens who have essentially an iPad. Through this story, we find that as the election becomes closer and closer, pretty soon information has been taken down, and we lose all information that we had to provide the voters. What does that do to this election, and what does that do to these characters? You're gonna have to read this book to find out. But the vibe that made this book really stand out to me is that this author continually pokes fun and is very jaded about humanity overall. She constantly seems to point out that despite having the obvious and complete truth, people constantly vote against their own best interests. And in this way, I feel like Malka Older and I are a little bit of a kindred spirit because we're both very jaded about humanity and its ability to take care of itself. And I really enjoyed the little jibes throughout this book. This is a trilogy, or the start of one, and I did pick up book 2, which definitely suffered from middle book syndrome in my opinion, but that doesn't take away at all from my enjoyment of book 1. I would highly recommend it. The next book on this list is a little bit more fun, and this one is A Darkling Sea by James Cambias. This is another book that I haven't heard a whole lot about, but this book takes place with second contact. In the far-flung future, humanity has already had first contact, and in the depths of the ocean, several scientists on a moon-like planet that is filled with ocean encounter a blind second sentient species. And not only are they trying to make good contact and make good impression, but this second sentient species gets caught up in a power struggle between the humans and the original sentient species that we have discovered. And whoever wins the alliance of this second sentient species is going to win the power struggle. And this story was very cinematic. There was very cool alien biologies, there's lots of interesting technology, and it all takes place deep, deep under the sea. So if you need to cool off, or you're in the mood for something in the deep, dark ocean, something that is alien but familiar, this book definitely has aliens for you. And I really am a huge sucker for the second contact trope, so this one is definitely one that scratched that itch that I really enjoyed. Next book on this list is probably by an author that you've heard of before, and that is Jeff Vandermeer's Borne. This book is sadly marketed as the first of a series or a duology, and I have to say the second book in the series is more of a prequel and only very vaguely reminiscent of this book, so I would probably call it a standalone. I've been a little bit intimidated by Jeff Vandermeer books, and I haven't really picked up anything before. This was my very first Vandermeer. It was different than what I expected. He has a really very beautiful, different way of describing nature. He takes us into a journey that really explores parenthood in a way that I wasn't expecting. In this book, we have our main character, Rachel, who lives in a world that has just been overrun by humanity's biogenetic accidents, and it's become pretty much hostile to human life. Rachel is barely scraping by, as is all the rest of humanity. She finds a creature that looks like a very rapidly growing plant that eventually evolves and becomes something that she calls Borne. It is a indistinguishable, indescribable blob that has the ability of speech.
Talk to me.
And she teaches it what is right and wrong, and for some reason has this very magnetic relationship attraction to it that is very mother-child. This, of course, disturbs those people around her, and she has to come to terms with Borne, who finally matures and becomes what he is ultimately designed to become, and these things are not what Rachel wanted for Borne. So you can see a lot of the interplay of parent-child in this book, and yet there's so many clever pieces of technology. There's so much bioengineering in this book that it makes it very interesting and a very foreign, almost surreal story. But don't worry, for those of you out there who don't like horror, this is not a horror book. I was not scared in any way. If anything, wished this book had gone a little bit deeper into some of these themes. For those of you who are wondering, I have these tabs on the side because at the very end of this book, Vandermeer has a guide to all the different creatures that he mentions throughout the story and has a little bit of information on each individual character, which definitely enhanced my reading of this story. So if you are kind of a little bit of a biology nerd, or if bioengineering and its problems are something that you would like, you will really enjoy this book, Borne. High recommend. Next book on this list is Stringers by Chris Panettiere. So you guys, this is a very satirical science fiction novel. Think Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but kind of in space.
Excellent!
It has been compared to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because the main character is very smarmy and the plot itself is very absurdist. However, we have our main character who feels like he's not a part of humanity. He knows a whole lot about biology and the mating habits of biological creatures that are occurring on Earth, and he doesn't know how he knows them. What we discover throughout the story, without ruining it, is that he is a stringer, which means that he is a part of a string of consciousness that somebody else has been on that string before. And he is privy to certain information that the person on his string knew before him. However, he is captured by aliens in the very first chapter. Maybe it's the second chapter. He is sought after because of what he knows. Our stringer before our main character is somebody who knew a secret about the alien species that might destroy the universe. And he, unbeknownst to him, also knows the secret. So this story was very absurdist and very satirical, and yet surprisingly, shockingly deep. There was a lot of depth to the story that I was unprepared for, and I really enjoyed this story a lot more than I thought. I spent a lot more time thinking about it after I was done with it, and I really would recommend this book to a lot of people who enjoy both depth and satire. While I admit that this book won't be for everyone, I really enjoyed it. Next book on this list is a recent release called Ymir by Rich Larson. This book has the superficial overtones of Beowulf. It is one of the most dark, gritty, cyberpunky vibes I've read in a long time, although there is no VR, must say that. We follow a very morally gray character who is a company man named Yorick. And Yorick has had a hard life, but he is called out of the company's depths to go back to his home planet of Ymir and go track down something known as a Grendel. It's a spoiler to tell you what that is, but I will tell you that when he gets to his home planet, this is not something that he's very excited about. He is seen as a traitor to his people in a world that is very backwater and struggling to survive already. And you really get a vibe for how terrible of a place, how Ymir is almost the seedy underbelly of the universe. And he meets up with a lot of his old friends who view him as a traitor, as well as his brother, who is trying to destroy the very company that Yorick works for. There's so much revenge story in this book that's mixed in with all of this really deep, gritty, violent plotline that also is filled with a lot of self-escapism with drug use, and there's tons of gene hacking and manipulation. There's a lot of really interesting use of technology. It very much felt like a cyberpunk novel, even though there's no VR. So if this book sounds like something that you're up for, if you're interested in a Beowulf-inspired, super cyberpunk, dark and gritty science fiction book, this one is definitely for you. The next one on our list is The Outside by Ada Hoffman. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I do have to say this book really wowed me, very much so because I was maybe not expecting it to be as awesome as it was. The writing style of this author reminds me of Yoon Ha Lee, who wrote the Nine Fox Gambit series, so if you were a fan of that series, you're shockingly gonna like this one, even though the stories are completely different. In The Outside, I think Ada Hoffman, the writer, was let down by her marketing staff because this book is often pitched as space horror. And what I want everyone out there to know is I'm a weenie when it comes to space horror, which is why I personally avoided this book until now. And what I discovered is that there's nothing scary about this book. I think the reason why a lot of people were potentially disappointed in it is they picked it up expecting a horror and it wasn't, or they were expecting a horror so they never picked it up, which I think definitely did a disservice for this novel. This novel follows an autistic main character who lives in a world that is governed very strictly by gods and angels. And these gods and angels very much govern and restrict all scientific advancements and computer technology. Kind of suspicious, right? What you discover as you go through the book or you read the back cover is that these gods and angels are actually sentient AI that have advanced way past human understanding. And they are trying to prevent humanity from making another big mistake. But our main character, because of her autism and because of her genius in the field of physics, has discovered a way around the regulations to test a new method of travel. And as she goes about testing her theory, things go wrong. She commits heresy. Oh no. And this heresy is something that allows the gods and angels to come down and abduct our main character and force her to try to undo all of the heresies that her new discovery has caused. I can't tell you more about this book without causing some significant spoilers, but I will tell you that the story was very engrossing. I was shocked and slightly impressed by the complexity and depth of this plot line and how much I related to this autistic main character. I really thought they did a really good job from what I know of autism in representing a neurodivergent main character without really shoving it down your throat. And I really enjoyed this world that Ada Hoffman has created where the sentient AI has become our gods and our tangible angels. I really think that this is a series that I cannot wait to finish, and I'm really excited to do so. The next book on this list is one that I picked up on a whim at the Library Delta V by Daniel Suarez. You can see this is definitely a library book. I'm sorry about that. I don't own a copy of this one yet. This one is a first in a series, and he is more famous for his book Damon, but I wasn't able to get a hold of a copy of that one, and I picked this one up instead, and I'm really glad I did. This is a techno-thriller story about a very famous cave diver named James who gets invited to a billionaire's special island. And he gets invited on an interstellar mission to go to an asteroid to mine the water and the mineral ore from the asteroid. And of course, that involves space training. It also involves quite a lot of science. There's a lot of economics at the beginning of this book, talking about the how and why we need to go to this asteroid to mine it, and what exactly our billionaire, our friendly neighborhood billionaire, gets out of it. The billionaire kind of reminds me of a cross between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, so it's kind of a weird combination there. This book was a really interesting read. I thought that it was especially fantastic in the beginning stages, and it wasn't until the end that I feel like it had a little bit of a softer ending than I wanted it to. I was a little bit disappointed, and it wrapped up too well. Like, you know, it was too pretty and too perfect of a bow at the very, very end. I also felt like maybe the billionaire character was just a little bit too altruistic to make this a believable story. But as far as a science fiction thriller, I came away from this book learning a lot, especially about economics of the world and the future of humanity that is apparently going to require mining from asteroids. So if you don't mind learning a little bit with your thrillers and having a perfect ending isn't something that's a requirement for you, I think this book should be on your radar. Also, I think there's a second book in this series that just came out called Critical Mass. So if you've read that book, please let me know in the comments down below if it was any good, and I'll consider picking it up also. And finally, last but not least, my arguably favorite book on this list that is rapidly becoming one of my top 15 favorite science fiction books of all time, Metro 2033. This book is initially translated from Russian and was published in the early 2000s. This book was my very first buddy read ever. And I gotta tell you, ever since I closed this cover, this book has only increased in my esteem. This book is also one of those books that was kind of a slog to get through when I was reading it. The main character, Artyom, is initially introduced because he lives in a world where we have been destroyed by nuclear holocaust, and the surface of the planet is no longer safe to live on. So the majority of the people and the humans who are left live in the Moscow subway system, which with each stop of the subway train being an entire little city. Artyom is delivered a message at the very beginning of the book that he is tasked with delivering to the other side of the metro system. And of course, the trains are no longer running, so he has to walk through all of the train stations and all the little cities to deliver his message. And what I've discovered about this book is, at least for the majority of the plot, Artyom and his characterization is not really important, but the author takes us through all of the gamut of humanity's coping mechanisms, including things like a variety of politics. He includes both extremist religion and things like ultimate insanity and cannibalism. He also explores rationalism in terms of like intellectualization to the point of coping and problematic thinking. He just goes through all the different ways that humans cope in one single book, and goes through station after station until he gets to the very end, where we discover what the message is and get to see the effects of that message. The ending of this book really caught me by surprise. I was so impressed, and I continue to think about that ending today. Wow, it's so interesting. This book was so well done and so well received that it inspired an entire series of video games called Metro. Shocking, I know. Another thing that made this book particularly interesting that is noteworthy is that this book uses darkness as a character. And I think that's a very interesting idea because I've only read one other Russian novel writer, and they also have this very peculiar way to describe eerie things. And I really liked this book. I would highly recommend it, even for those who have played the game and know the plot. I think that there's so many little tidbits of knowledge. There's so many really well done phrases. I just can't get over this book. I love it to pieces. I think that you will too. So please check out this book. And that does it, you guys, for our modern science fiction books second list. Don't forget to check out that first list. If you want to talk to me about some more modern science fiction books that you think I should check out, I'm all about more recommendations. So leave them in the comments section down below, or come join me on my Discord where we talk about both modern and classic science fiction. I would love to hear your opinions. Until next time, you guys, see ya later.